"It is the 12th of April, your grace," said the butler, in the tone of a man laying a loaded pistol on the breakfast table. Ansel Caro, 7th Duke of Farrowgate, did not look up from his correspondence. "Then let it be the 12th. I have never known Mero to argue with a calendar." "No, your grace. You have something further to say, only that the 12th of April, your grace, is her grace's birthday." The letter in Ansel's hand did not tremble, because his hands never trembled. But something behind his ribs shifted, the way a stone shifts in a wall when the frost has been at it for years and no one has thought to look. He set the letter down. He looked at the clock on the mantel of the small breakfast room at Farrowgate House, at the pale wet light coming through the tall windows, at the place across the table where his wife's cup sat, used and cooling, and where his wife did not sit. "She has breakfasted already," he said. "An hour ago, your grace. She asked me to say that she would not require the carriage." "Where is she?" Her grace did not say. Ansel Caro was a man who governed 6,000 acres, 2 coal seams, a canal company, and a seat in the Lords that other men leaned toward when they wished to know how a vote would fall. He had been called the Iron Duke of Farrowgate by men who meant it as a compliment and by women who meant it as a warning. He had never in his life mislaid a figure, a debt, promise made to a tenant, or a date on which a bill was due. He understood now with a slow and unfamiliar horror, mislaid the 12th of April 7 times. "Your grace, how long have I been married?" The butler, who had been in the house since Ansel was a boy in leading strings, permitted himself the smallest pause. 7 years this September, your grace. 7 years. 7/12ths of April. He sat very still and did an arithmetic he had never troubled to do, and the answer sat in front of him like a bill long overdue, with the interest reckoned. "Send to Pruitt's," he said at last. "The jeweller." "Have them bring, your grace," said Mero, and stopped. Ansel looked up. In 7 years, in 31, if he counted from the nursery, Mero had never once interrupted him. "Say it. You sent to Pruitt's in the 3rd year, your grace, and in the 5th. A bracelet, and then the sapphire drops." The old man's face was perfectly correct and perfectly terrible. "Her grace wore them once each, and thanked you, and put them away." "And what?" Ansel said, more quietly than he had intended. "Would you have me send instead?" "That is not for me to say, your grace." But he had said it. He had said it entirely. Ansel rose. He went to the window. Below, in the grey square, a flower seller was arguing cheerfully with a crossing sweeper, and the plane trees were just coming into that raw green that London wears for 3 weeks and then forgets. Somewhere out in that city was Thomasson, and he did not know where, and the not knowing had a new and appalling weight to it, because he realized, standing there, that he had not known where she was for a very long time. He had married her in the September after his father died, because the estate wanted a duchess, and because Thomasson Vale, of a good poor, unfashionable family in the north, had looked at him across a crowded drawing room with an expression of frank, quiet amusement, as though she saw something in him that the rest of them did not, and had not been afraid. He had thought, then, that he had years. He had thought that a man builds first and lives after. He had put the living aside the way a careful man puts aside a bottle, meaning to come to it. 7 years, 7 bottles laid down and never opened. "Mero," he said, "cancel the Lords." "Your grace, the canal bill, cancel it." He heard the door close behind him and stood alone in the breakfast room with his wife's cooling cup, and he could not for the life of him have said what she took in her tea. She had not always been out. That was the part that had teeth. In the 1st year, Thomasson had waited. He remembered it now the way a man remembers a room he walked through with his mind elsewhere, and only afterwards, years later, recalls what was in it. A table laid for 2 in the long dining room at Farrowgate Court, candles lit. A dish of early strawberries. She had gone herself to the succession houses to beg from the gardener. He had come in at 11 from a meeting with the canal company's surveyors, seen the candles guttered down to stubs, and thought absently that the household was extravagant with wax. She had come to the door of his study in her good green gown and said, "It is my birthday." And he had said, he could hear himself say it, in the flat, kind, reasonable voice that was the voice he used for everything, and that he had believed all his life to be a virtue. "Is it? Then many happy returns, my dear. I have the Ledbury survey to sign before the post." She had stood there a moment. He had not looked up. He had heard the door close, and had thought nothing at all. In the second year she had gone to bed early. In the third he had sent the bracelet. In the fourth he had been in Yorkshire and had written her a letter about drainage. In the fifth, the sapphires. In the sixth year he realized, standing at the window with his hands behind her, she had not mentioned it. That was the year she had stopped. He went up to her sitting room. He had not been in it, he thought, since it was papered. It was a small room at the back of the house, over the garden, and it was not at all what he expected, and the discovery of that was like a hand laid flat against his chest. There was no idleness in it. There was a writing table under the window with a ledger open on it, a ledger in his wife's hand, ruled and totaled, and a stack of letters tied with tape, and a paint box worn to the wood at the corners, and a great untidy portfolio leaning against the leg of the table. He should not have opened it. He opened it. Watercolours, dozens. The park at Farrowgate Court in every weather. The Ledbury Road under snow. A study of the old gamekeeper's hands. The kitchen cat asleep in a copper pan. And near the bottom, done years ago by the yellowing of the paper, a man in a dark coat standing at a window with his back to the room and his head bent over a paper, the whole of him drawn with a tenderness so exact and so unhappy that Ansel had to set it down on the table and take his hand away from it. Under the portfolio was a book. A common household diary, bound in blue cloth. He turned it toward the light and read, on the page for that day, in her round, firm, unhurried hand, 12th of April. My birthday. I shall not spend it waiting. That was all. Not a reproach. Not a line of grief. Nothing he could take hold of and argue with. No accusation. He might have answered, in his flat, reasonable voice, with a fact. She would not spend it waiting. He stood in his wife's sitting room among her paintings and her ledgers and the small warm evidences of a life he had not been invited into, because he had never once asked. And Ansel Carow discovered that a man may be perfectly upright and perfectly punctual and perfectly solvent, and still be a thief. He found her at 4 o'clock, and he found her by accident, which was the humiliation he deserved. He had gone first to her friends and learned that she had none he could name, that the two he named had not seen her in a 12-month, and looked at him with a pity that made his collar tight. He had gone to the milliner and the bookseller. And then, having no better thought, he had walked, which he had not done in London in years, and at the corner of a mean little street behind the Foundling Gardens he heard a laugh he did not recognize and knew, absolutely, that it was hers. She was standing on a step in the doorway of a plain brick building with a brass plate, and her bonnet was pushed back, and her sleeves were turned up, and there was a smear of blue paint along the inside of her wrist. A knot of women stood about her, poor women, in shawls, and one of them was holding up a sheet of paper as though it were a banknote, and Thomasson was laughing and saying, "No, no, higher, hold it higher, Mrs. Dunn, or the light will make a liar of you." He stopped in the street like a man who has walked into a wall in the dark, his wife, laughing. Not the smooth, dutiful, silvered laugh she gave at his table, the one he had heard so often that he had ceased to hear it. This was a laugh that came up from somewhere and knocked things over. She turned her head and saw him. The laugh went out. That was the worst of it. Not anger, not tears. The light in her face simply drew back, polite, the way a servant steps out of a room when the master enters, and left a well-bred stranger standing on the step. "Your Grace," said Thomasson, Duchess of Farrowgate. The women had gone very quiet. "I have been looking for you," he said. "Have you?" She said it without any question in it at all, and came down the step and shook out her sleeves and began, quite calmly, to put her bonnet straight. "You had better not stand there. The drays come round the corner blind, Thomasson. There is nothing wrong at the house," she said. "Merrow would have sent a boy. So there is nothing wrong, and you are here." She looked up at him, and for one instant something moved behind her eyes, something that might have been the ghost of a hope so old had grown thin. "You have remembered." "I have remembered." "Ah," she said. And she smiled, a small, kind, dreadful smile. 7 years is not so long. Some men take longer. "Let me take you home." "No, I thank you." She drew on one glove. "I am engaged this evening." "Engaged," he repeated. "Mrs. Dunn's daughter is to be married on Saturday, and there is a great deal of stitching that will not do itself, and afterwards there is a supper, and it is only bread and cheese and a very bad ham, and I would not miss it for the world. She drew on the other glove. It has been the finest day I have ever had, Ansel. I should like to keep it. He had been shouted at in the Lords. He had been threatened once by a man with a knife on the Ledbury Road. Nothing in his life had ever emptied him so thoroughly as the small courthouse cruelty of that sentence, which was not cruel at all, and which he had earned with both hands. "May I ask what you did," he said, "with your day?" She considered him. It occurred to him that she was deciding whether he was worth the truth, and that he did not know which way she would decide, and that this was a thing that had never happened to him before. "I woke early," she said at last, "and no one wanted anything of me. I walked in the park before it was aired and watched the deer come down to the water. I ate bread and butter standing up in the kitchen with Mrs. Hale, who told me about her sister. I painted the light on the river for 2 hours and got it wrong, and then I got it right. I came here and taught 9 women their letters, which I have been doing on Thursdays for a year, and which you did not know, and which I did not tell you, because—" She stopped. Because I had stopped telling you things," said Thomasson, "and I did not notice when—" The plane trees moved above them. Somewhere a dray went by blind round the corner. "And it was a good day," she said. "It was the best day I have ever had. And do you know why? Tell me." "Because at 4 o'clock I did not look at the door. She did not come home until past 11. He knew, because he was in the hall when she did, and he had been in the hall, more or less, for 4 hours, to the visible distress of 2 footmen who did not know whether they were permitted to see him there. He heard the carriage, a hired one, which cost him something, and the door, and then Thomasson came in with her bonnet over her arm and stopped when she saw him standing under the lamp at the foot of the stairs. "You will take a chill," she said. "Where did you learn to teach letters?" She blinked. Whatever she had braced herself for, it had not been that. "My mother kept a school," she said, "for 2 years, when my father's affairs were bad, before we were respectable again. A faint dry note. You did not know that either." "No, it is not in the settlements." "No," he agreed, "it is not." She looked at him a moment longer, and he saw her weariness then, under the brightness, the long day, the stitching, the bad ham, the walk to the corner where the hackney stood. She was 30 years old, and she had spent 7 of them in his house, and he had never once, that he could remember, asked her a question to which he did not already require a particular answer. Thomas said, "I do not know how to begin." "Then do not," she said, not unkindly. "Truly, Ansel. It is late, and you have the canal bill on Thursday, and I am very tired, and I am not angry. That is what I should like you to understand. I am not angry, and I have not been angry for a long while, and I am sorry for it, because anger would have been a kind of company." She went up past him. 3 stairs, 4. "I do not want the canal bill," he said. She stopped. "I want to know what you take in your tea," said the Duke of Farrowgate to his wife's back, in the empty hall, with 2 footmen frozen in the shadows and the lamp swinging faintly overhead. "I want to know why the light on the river was wrong at first, and how you got it right. I want to know what Mrs. Hale said about her sister. I have had 7 years of a woman I did not trouble to meet, and I find that I cannot bear it, and I have no right whatever to say so." Thomasson stood on the 4th stair with her hand on the rail. "Oh," she said at last, quite steadily. "You have no right," and she went up. He did not sleep. That was not remarkable. He often did not. What was remarkable was that he did not work. He sat in his study with the Ledbury papers untouched and the fire going down, and thought, with the same cold thoroughness he brought to a rival's balance sheet, about the account he had run up, the strawberries, the green gown, the letter about drainage, 6 birthdays and a 7th, and beneath them, like silt, 10,000 smaller things, the time she had begun a sentence at dinner and he had signed a paper through it, the 2 occasions, he could recall them exactly now, which was its own punishment, when she had put her hand on the back of his chair as she passed, and he had not turned, the year she had been ill in the spring, and he had sent the physician and not gone up. He had believed himself a good husband because he had never been a bad one. He had not gambled. He had not drunk. He had not looked at another woman. The thought had genuinely never presented itself. He had thought that a man's love was demonstrated in the acreage he did not lose and the roof he did not let leak. and he had told himself, in the corner of his mind where a man keeps the things he does not examine, that Thomasson knew, that she must know, that it did not want saying. She had not known. She had waited to be told for years in a green gown by guttering candles, and then she had stopped waiting and had become, he had seen it on the step, in the mean little street, in the blue paint on her wrist, magnificently, unbearably happy. That was his reckoning. Not that she had suffered, that she had ceased to. At 5 in the morning he rang for Mero, who arrived dressed, which meant that he had not been to bed either. Mero, when her Grace goes to the Foundling Gardens on a Thursday, how does she go? She walks, your Grace. There is no carriage ordered for her. There are 4 carriages in this house. Yes, your Grace. Ansel absorbed that. Has she asked for one? Her Grace does not ask for things, your Grace. A pause. She did. Yes, said Ansel. I imagine she did. He rubbed his hand across his eyes. Outside, the sky over the square was going the color of a pearl. I am going to make a great many mistakes, he said, in the next few weeks, and I am going to make most of them in front of you. I shall endeavor not to notice, your Grace. Notice, said Ansel. That is precisely what I am asking of everyone in this house from this morning. Notice. He did not send jewels. He had thought of it in the grey hour, out of sheer terror, the animal instinct of a man who has only ever known one way to pay, and had put it from him. Pruitt's would not mend this. Nothing that could be wrapped in silk and set on a breakfast table would mend this, because the injury was not that she had gone without. The injury was that she had gone unseen. So he began awkwardly, at the beginning, like a man of 40 learning to swim. On Wednesday he came down to breakfast at 8, which he had not done in 6 years, and found her already there, and saw her hesitate, actually hesitate, at her own table before she sat. You take it plain, he said. She looked up. Your tea. Plain and rather strong, and you leave the last inch. He set the pot down. I watched. It is not a great feat of intellect. I want you to know that I did not ask Mero. Something crossed her face too quickly to name. You are absurd, she said. Very likely. You have the bill on Thursday. Grantham may have the bill on Thursday, said Ansel, and if he mangles it, the canal will still be there in the autumn, and so, God willing, will I. He buttered his toast with great concentration, because he did not trust his hands. Tell me about Mrs. Hale's sister. Thomasson took down her cup. You will be bored, she said. Probably, said Ansel. I am told that is what a marriage is largely composed of, and that people are very fond of it. I should like to find out. And after a long moment, a moment in which he understood that she was weighing whether to be hurt again, and that she had every reason not to risk it, and that the risk was entirely hers and none of it his wife said, Mrs. Hale's sister has married a fishmonger in Deptford, and she does not approve of him, and she has been to visit 11 times. 11. She says it is duty. I say it is the fish. Ansel laughed. He heard the sound come out of himself with something like alarm, and he saw Thomasson's head come up, and he saw, quite plainly across the toast rack, that his wife had not heard him laugh in so long that she had forgotten what it sounded like. They neither of them said anything about that, but she poured him a second cup without being asked, and left the last inch in her own, and Ansel thought that he had never in his life been given anything so valuable, and so nearly nothing at all. It went slowly, which he had not expected and which humbled him further. He had assumed in the arrogance he was only now learning to see, that repentance would be met halfway, that a man who woke up would find the door opened to him. But Thomasson had built a life in the years he had not been looking, and it did not have a chair in it for him, and she did not turn it out to make one. She went to the Foundling Gardens on Thursday. He did not offer the carriage. He had learned that much. He asked instead whether he might walk with her, and she said, quite pleasantly, No, I think not, and went, and he stood in the hall and took it, because there was nothing else to take. He asked her the following week what the ledger on her writing table was. The Ledbury cottages, she said, without looking up from her book. Yours, 6 of them have not had a roof mended since your father's time. Your steward's returns say otherwise. I have been keeping a true count for 3 years, in case anyone ever asked me. Ansel sat down. Why did you not tell me? I did, said Thomasson, in the 4th year. You said you would look into it, and you meant it, and you were on the Ledbury Road for a fortnight, and you did not look into it. because your steward told you it was in hand, and you have always believed men in coats over women in drawing rooms. The fire cracked. Ansel looked at his hands. "Bring me the ledger," he said. "It is on my table. You know where it is. You have been in the room." He looked up sharply. "The portfolio was tied," she said, "and it was untied when I came home." There was no anger in her face, only that steady level, terrible attention, the attention of a woman who has stopped needing anything from you and can therefore afford to see you exactly as you are. "You may look my paintings, Ansel. I do not mind, but do not pretend you did not. I do not pretend. I looked. There is one of a man at a window with his back to the room." The colour came up in her face then, the first he had seen. "That is nothing," she said. "That is old." "It is the best thing in the folder," said Ansel, "and I have not been able to think of anything else for 11 days, and I would give every acre I have not to be him." She left the room, but she left the ledger on the table by his chair, and he sat up until 2 in the morning with it. And by the end of the week the Ledbury steward had been turned off, and 6 roofs were in hand, and Ansel had written to her about it, a letter to his own wife in his own house, because he found that he could say it better on paper and was ashamed of that too, and sent it up anyway, because a coward who acts is still an act ahead of a coward who does not. She did not answer the letter, but at dinner she said, "The widow Petch's roof is the worst. Do that one first." And he said, "It is done first." And she looked at him for a long, unreadable moment across the length of a table built to seat 30, and then went back to her soup, and Ansel Caro felt the frost move, very slightly, in a wall that had been standing for 7 years. In June she told him she was going away. She said it at breakfast, plainly as she said everything now. "I mean to go north for the summer, to my aunt at Kirkhoe. She is old and she is dull, and she has a good north light in the parlour, and I should like to paint for 3 months without being a duchess." Ansel set down his cup with great care, because his hand had learned in the last weeks to want to shake. "For how long?" "I have said 3 months." And then Thomasson folded her napkin. It took her rather longer than folding a napkin requires. "I do not know," she said. There it was. Not a threat. She was incapable of threatening him, which was worse, because it meant she had simply told him the truth, and the truth was that she did not know. He thought of a dozen things to say. He had been a persuasive man all his life. He had turned a vote in the Lords with 9 sentences. Every one of the dozen was a way of keeping her, and he sat there and looked at his wife in the morning light and understood, at last and completely, that a man who keeps a woman has not got her. "Shall I order the travelling carriage?" he said, "or would you rather I did not?" She looked at him. Her eyes were bright and hard and unhappy. "Order it," she said. He handed her into it himself on a Tuesday, with the servants drawn up in the hall because they had made up their own minds about their master, and were determined to see him suffer through the whole of it. "You will write to me," she said, "about the roofs." "I will write to you about everything," said Ansel. "You are not obliged to read it." She almost smiled. And then she was in the carriage, and the door was shut, and the Duke of Farrowgate stood in his own doorway in the June sun and watched his wife drive away, and did not follow, which was the hardest single thing he had done in 41 years. He wrote to her every week, not about drainage. He had done that already. He had done it for 7 years, and he had discovered what it purchased. He wrote to her that the plane trees in the square had come into full leaf, and that he had noticed them, and that noticing appeared to be a skill like Greek, which one lost by disuse and regained slowly and with humiliation. He wrote that he had gone on a Thursday to the plain brick building behind the Foundling Gardens, and had stood at the back, and had been made to feel a very great fool by a woman of 70 named Mrs. Dunn, who had told him, without any particular reverence, that her Grace was the only lady of quality she had ever met who did not talk to them as though they were deaf. He wrote that he had taken over the Thursday lessons badly, that he had been informed by of 19 that his hand was too fine and could not be read, and had been set to copying and had copied, that the 9 women had become 14, that he had bought the freehold of the plain brick building and the 2 either side of it, and had had the deed made out, and here he stopped, and began the letter again on a fresh sheet, because he had been about to say "made out to you, my dear," as a gift, and he had seen in time that it was a bracelet, that it was Pruitt's in brick. So he wrote instead, "The deed is made out to a board of 5. Mrs. Dunn is one. I am not one. I have put your name to it, and I have put no power of mine over it, and if you never speak to me again it will stand, and it will be yours, and I cannot take it back. I did not do it to be forgiven. I did it because you were right and I was not, and a man ought to pay what he owes even to a creditor who has stopped presenting the bill." He did not ask her to come home, not once in 11 letters. She wrote back to the 4th, 3 lines about the North Light and 1 about her aunt's cat. He read it 200 times. She wrote back to the 7th, half a page. To the 10th she did not write at all, and he lay awake and told himself that he had built the whole of his life on the principle that a debt honestly owed must be honestly paid however long the payment took, and that he would go on paying it until he died, and that this was not a bargain because he expected nothing, and that expecting nothing was, he suspected, the first honest thing he had ever felt. She came home in September, on the day of their anniversary, and did not mention that it was. Neither did he. He had learned that much, not to snatch. She looked well. She looked, if he was honest, and he was learning to be, at some cost, better than she had ever looked in his house, brown from the north and stronger, and with that ease about her that he had first seen on a doorstep in a mean little street. She had brought 40 canvases and a great many opinions about her aunt. At dinner she told him about them, and he listened and asked, and she answered, and the length of the table between them seemed to him the exact measurement of everything he had wasted. "Ansel," she said, "over the fruit. Mrs. Dunn writes to me. She says you cannot form a legible letter and that you are the humblest man she ever taught anything to. She is a tyrant. She says you come every Thursday, even in August. There was no one else to come," said Ansel. "That is not a virtue. It is only arithmetic." Thomasson turned her glass by the stem. "I did not expect you to last," she said. "I want you to know that. I expected 6 weeks and a letter about drainage and then a bracelet." "Yes," said Ansel. "So did I." She laughed, the real one, the one that came up from somewhere and knocked things over, and he closed his eyes for a moment because he had waited 7 months to hear it in his own house. "You are not the man I married," she said. He said, "I am sorry to say that the man you married is precisely who I was, and I have spent a year finding it out." He looked down the table at her. "I am not asking you for anything. I want that understood, because I am not a subtle man and I would rather be plain. You do not owe me a marriage. You owe me nothing whatever. But if you should ever wish to spend an evening in the company of a dull, punctual, rather stupid man who has finally learned what you take in your tea, he is at Farrowgate House on most nights, and he keeps the fire up. The candles burned. A footman at the sideboard was very carefully looking at nothing. Thomasson rose. She came down the whole length of that ridiculous table and stopped beside his chair and stood there. "Turn round," she said. He did not understand. "In the painting," said Thomasson, and her voice was not quite steady, "you never turn round. 7 years, Ansel. I painted you 100 times, and I could never once paint your face, because I never once had it." Her hand was on the back of his chair. He could feel it, through the wood, through the years. "Turn round." Ansel Carrow turned round. And his wife put her hand against his cheek, and he covered it with his own, and neither of them said anything at all for a long time, and the candles went down, and nobody in that house thought for 1 instant about the wax. The 12th of April came again. He had made no arrangements. He had thought about it for 4 months and had arrived, after a great deal of internal argument, at the conclusion that any arrangement he made would be a way of making the day about himself, and that the day was not his. So he woke at 5 and lay looking at the ceiling of a room he had shared for 6 months and had never once taken for granted, and when she stirred he said, "It is the 12th of April. Said Thomasson into the pillow. "I have not planned anything." She opened one eye. "I thought," said Ansel, "that you might tell me what you would like to do, and that I would do it, and that if what you would like to do is to spend the day entirely without me, I would order the carriage and go to the Lord's and be thoroughly miserable and say nothing about it. Because it is your day and you have earned the whole of it, every hour, and I have earned none." Thomasson sat up. Her hair was down. The light was coming grey and pink through the curtains, and she looked at him for a long moment with an expression he had never been able to paint either. "Ansel Caro," she said, "you great fool, I do not want the day without you. I never wanted the day without you. I wanted the day with you, and when I could not have it, I made it a good day anyway, because I refused to spend one more year sitting in a green gown watching a door." She pushed the hair out of her eyes. "That is not the same thing at all." He could not speak. "Get up," she said. "We are going to walk in the park before it is aired, and we are going to watch the deer come down to the water, and then we are going to eat bread and butter standing up in the kitchen, and Mrs. Hale will tell you about her sister, and you will be very bored, and you will pretend not to be, and I shall enjoy that enormously, and then I am going to paint the river, and I shall get it wrong, and then I shall get it right, and you may sit on the bank and hold the water jar and say nothing." "I can do that," said Ansel. "I am extremely good at saying nothing." "You are not," said his wife. "You have not been for a year. It is the only thing about you I could not have predicted, and I find I cannot do without it." They walked in the park before it was aired. The deer came down to the water. He held the jar, and she got the light wrong, and then, at 2:30 in the afternoon, with her tongue between her teeth and blue paint along the inside of her wrist, she got it right. At 4 o'clock Ansel looked at his wife instead of at his watch, and found that he could not remember what a watch was for. "There," said Thomasson, without looking up from the paper. 4 o'clock. You did not look at the door." "There is no door," said the Duke of Farrowgate. "There is only you. There has only ever been you. It took me 7 years and a great many roofs to find it out, and I shall spend whatever I have left saying so, until you are heartily sick of hearing it." She set down the brush. "Say it again on the 13th, she said, "and the 14th. That is all I ever wanted, Ansel. Not the sapphires, not the 12th of April." She smiled at him, and it was the doorstep smile, the one that knocked things over, and it was for him. "The 13th. He said it on the 13th. He said it on the 14th. And on a great many other days that were nobody's birthday at all, in a house where the fires were kept up and the wax was not economized, and a duchess's ledgers lay open on the desk beside a duke's, and in the years that followed, when the 14 women behind the Foundling Gardens had become 100, and a schoolroom bore no one's name at all because she would not have it, and a portfolio in a bright north room filled slowly with paintings of a man who at last learned to turn round. The Duke of Farrowgate was never once late to the 12th of April again, but it was the ordinary mornings he treasured, was the 13ths.